Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all. This is another live edition of the Andrew Lawton Show. Not just any old live edition of the Andrew Lawton Show, but a live Davos edition of the program, coming to you from the village of Davos Cloisters in the Swiss mountains in the Swiss Alps, where the World Economic Forum's 2023 annual meeting is taking place. Now, today was, I believe, day 3, and oh my goodness, was it a busy day. Now, yesterday we did pretty well with racking up interviews or attempted interviews. I'm looking at you, Prime Minister of Belgium, with heads of government and heads of state. Today we were more at the sub-head of state, head of government level, but still some very important encounters, I'd say, that we'll talk about on the program here with the U.S. energy and climate change czar, John Kerry, with Canada's freedom-loving, well, no, different person, with Chrystia Freeland, Canada's not exactly freedom-loving if you look at her financial record as Minister of Finance, but she's here as a trustee of the WEF or as Canada's Deputy Prime Minister. I'm not entirely sure. And who else do we have today? We did have the Prime Minister of Kurdistan. Now, whether you call him a head of state is a very contentious question. I believe that the Turks would not be too happy if I called him a head of state, and the Iraqis wouldn't be too happy if I called him a head of state, but he was a very kind man, and I didn't even have a question for him at the time, so I just blurted out the first thing, and he gave a very nondescript answer. But I'm not going to blame him for that one, as you'll learn a little bit later on. And some other things that I'm going to share that came up in the course of covering the World Economic Forum today. I want to start with a bit of a more serious note. I think a lot of this is very serious. Yesterday we had some fun with the hot chocolate and the organic healthy juice bar, and I think all of that is really useful to illuminate the totality of what happens here in Davos. But the big theme that we've been exploring since we've been here has been about what exactly is the product being sold. And I do think that there is a question that needs to be answered, as I've said time and time again, about what happens when you take corporate leaders and government leaders and you put them under one roof and you take away a level of scrutiny. And again, I am very transparent about the fact that the World Economic Forum allowed me to go through their media accreditation process. They gave me a press badge, but that press badge is not an all-access pass. There are a lot of places that are not within the realm of where I'm allowed to go. There are areas where I can only go at certain times, and one of those is the main conference center, where I was able to be today for only about an hour. And at the same time, you also see people just running around, walking up and down the street. You get the chance to run into people in all sorts of places. And this morning, I actually had an ambitious goal. And I said to my producer, I said to our team back in Canada, I want to talk to John Kerry today. And I want to talk to Chrystia Freeland today. Literally, I should have just gotten the screenshot from our internal working group chat room, whatever it's called. Those are the two I said I wanted to get to. And lo and behold, today I encountered John Kerry and Chrystia Freeland. I think talk to would be a bit of a stretch for reasons that you will see in just a moment here. And one of the big things that I have been saying is that Chrystia Freeland, I believe, has to answer for how she sits as a trustee with the WEF, how she sits as a senior official for the organization's oversight. And the trustees, if you look on the WEF website, are tasked with fulfilling and upholding the mandate and mission of the World Economic Forum. And also how she holds that role while sitting as a Minister of the Crown, as the Deputy Prime Minister specifically, a very senior role, one might say. And I've never heard of any Canadian journalist asking her this question. So I asked her myself.
Hi, Minister. Andrew Lawton, True North. I was just wondering if it's a conflict of interest for you to be a trustee while also a cabinet minister. Are you proud of the work? And if so, why is there an issue answering a question about it? Enjoy your panel, Minister.
All right. 17 seconds. I asked her, very simple, very direct, very politely, is there a conflict of interest in you having these two roles? When I realized that she was just continuing to beeline for the part that I wasn't allowed to go into, I changed the tone a little bit and said, okay, if this is something that you're completely proud of, you own up to, what's the issue answering a question? Now, this is something that I struggle with because I actually like being able to have conversations with people. And for the most part, I have had incredibly good fortune this week in Davos with people, even those with whom I disagree on many things, and fundamentally being all too willing to chat and explain what it is that they're all about. I didn't actually come here to get into fights with people. I came here to understand. I came here to shine a light. I came here to, when necessary, hold up a bit of a mirror. Chrystia Freeland, though, is not the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. She is not the CEO of a company that owes me nothing. She is not the representative of an organization that owes me nothing. She's one of the few people here that is in a very direct way accountable to me. Not me, Andrew Lawton, one individual person, but me as part of the collective of Canadians. Set aside for the fact that I'm a journalist here, set aside the fact that I'm a journalist on the right end of the spectrum, I am a Canadian citizen asking what I think is a very legitimate question to the Deputy Prime Minister of my country. And the fact that I don't get the opportunity to do that without flying to Switzerland is, I think, quite shameful. I have emailed many requests over the years to Chrystia Freeland's office for a number of things. Every single one of them has gone unresponded to. This is the woman who in 2019, when I was covering the Global Conference for Media Freedom, which she co-hosted along with the UK, originally tried to ban True North, ban me, and also Sheila Gunn-Reid of Rebel News from attending the press conference. You've heard this story before. It was only when, to their credit, a number of mainstream media reporters put their feet down and said this isn't going to fly, that the minister's office relented. But I have tried to interview her. I've tried to talk to her on the campaign trail. I've tried to run into her. I know David Menzies ran into her at some event in Toronto and she did the same thing. She just quickly bolted into a back door. But I actually don't get the opportunity in my own country to ask Minister Freeland a question. She isn't the reason I flew over to Switzerland. We were going to come before we even knew for sure she would be speaking. But that doesn't mean it's not an important message that she's sending, which is that she doesn't actually care. Does she not care about her political critics? Does she not care about press freedom? Does she not care about answering questions about her connections to the WEF? In fairness to Minister Freeland, I think I could have asked her what her favorite ice cream flavor was, and she still probably would have continued walking away, ignoring the fact that I was standing there. But this is something that is quite shameful. And at the risk of extrapolating too much, I think is exactly the problem with Davos, is that the elites come here because they often believe it's their safe space from any criticism, their safe space from any of these discussions and any very real and substantive questions. I mean, Chrystia Freeland gets up on a panel and she's all too willing to be candid about Ukraine and be candid about this and Canada's foreign policy and that, but she won't be candid about her own relationship with the very organization. So while I do not want to make myself the story, and I don't want to make this show about, oh, boo-hoo, Chrystia Freeland won't talk to me, which, to be honest, it probably makes for a better day sometimes, I do think it's a very important message that she's sending, and not a positive message. And one that I think underscores the very real challenges of this elite world that's being cultivated here, where they genuinely believe that they're above answering questions. And Chrystia Freeland was certainly one example of that today, and it's one where I think, again, she owes me something as a Canadian citizen that is slightly different than other people here that perhaps have a moral obligation to answer questions, but don't actually have a democratic mandate. But again, just to give you the whole picture here, John Kerry also didn't exactly want to talk, and he was an interesting case because he was one that I learned was doing an event outside of the main Davos perimeter, the main WEF perimeter. He was doing an event in a church that, like anything else in Davos, is apparently for sale and was rented out by CNBC to host a non-stop stream of programming. And he was doing this talk on sustainability. He was doing it at the altar of climate change. And I just ducked out a little bit early because I said, you know what, there are only two ways into this building and two ways out. And it is not the front door that he's going to go out. So I just waited around the back with my videographer, and lo and behold, John Kerry came by. And I wanted to ask, again, a very real question that you could put to anyone who talks about transitioning away from oil and gas, anyone who talks about the road to net zero, anyone who talks about reducing emissions, which is why does everyone in the world, the Western world, the industrialized world, the developed world, whatever you want to call it, why does everyone in producing nations have to suffer for an ambition that the nations actually causing the problem don't have a solution for. And I'm talking, of course, about China. China is, without a doubt, the world's largest emitter. I don't have the chart in front of me right now, but I know that it has the emissions of pretty much the bulk of the least industrialized nations combined. And even when you look at the top 10 ranking, United States is a very heavy emitter relative to other countries, but still nowhere near China. Next, you typically have India. Canada is just a tiny wee little fraction. Canada could drop its emissions to zero overnight, and it would do pretty much nothing for the world's grandiose net zero commitment. But people like John Kerry don't actually want to talk about China. They occasionally say China is going to be a partner in climate, ignoring the fact that China is ramping up coal production by the day, especially with rising energy costs. So it was a very simple question, and I think a very fair question, and something that a seasoned a politician as John Kerry should have been able to answer. But he didn't.
Why should anyone else in the world have to deal with emissions reductions when China is not? You can't speak about China's impact, sir? Why should we have to deal with carbon prices when China is not lowering its emissions? Keep the distance, right? Absolutely. You're between me and him. It's okay.
Now, at the end there, we left that in because I just want to give you a bit of context on this. And I've posted a video just of this with a bit more information as well. But what happened was my videographer, Sean, who's here in Davos doing tremendous work, he has this fancy camera that means he has to stay pretty far away from me to get the whole picture. It had something to do with resolution. I don't know the technical details. I just hold the microphone and go where I need to. But as a result, it meant that the security guards needed to divide and conquer. So the female officer or security guard, I don't know what she was, goes over to Sean and just attempts to obscure the view with an iPad or a MacBook or whatever it was. And then I just keep sauntering all over to John Kerry. And that brings me to one of the police officers in John Kerry's personal security detail, who by this time I'm maybe 8-9 feet from John Kerry, and this police officer is between me and John Kerry, and he turns around and tells me to keep my distance. And what I'm saying at the end there is, yeah, I mean, you're between me and him. I'm pretty sure the distance is being kept here. But I made it through the day without getting the handcuffs thrown on me. I did not get an answer to the question at all. And again, why are these people above scrutiny? Now, John Kerry is a fascinating character because he doesn't even hide his climate hypocrisy. He literally flies around the world, often on private jets. He jets to this summit, this conference, this treaty meeting, this and that. He goes everywhere to tell everyone that they should do a lot less, that they should reduce their emissions, they should ease their carbon footprint. He takes the limo from one mansion to the helicopter to the private jet to the helicopter to the limo of the other mansion, and then he gets on the yacht and goes over to the island and tells us that we need to travel less. And it was interesting because in that discussion he was having this morning in the church for CNBC, he joked about how much he flies as the climate czar of the United States.
What has been the most challenging aspect of your role as special envoy for climate?
Making my flights on time.
Oh, isn't that so cute? He's got so much travel as the climate envoy for the United States. He has trouble making his flights on time. Missing from that little joke is that when you fly private, I don't think they take off without you. So his schedule is probably a little bit more easy to manage than he is letting on there. But there is this category that is different than left and right. It's this categorization that involves the elites versus the everyman, the people that make the rules, the people that live by the rules, the people that issue the proclamations, and those who are accountable to them and beholden to them just by virtue of not having the power or influence to push back against them. And I think more and more people are pushing back against them. There was one gentleman I met, and again, I don't know him very well. He came up to me, and I did a cursory Google of him just to make sure he was who he said he was. But he is a Dutch MP that came to Davos to, I don't know if protest is the right word, but certainly to speak out against it. And he represented, as he introduced himself to me, the only anti-globalist party in the Netherlands. So I don't know if he's the Maxime Bernier of the Netherlands, but he certainly had a fascinating account for why he was there. And while I don't know Dutch politics too much, we certainly were able to talk about some of the bigger picture things together. This is my interview today with MP Thierry Baudet.
So what brings you to the World Economic Forum here in Davos?
Well, basically, I'm here to show the people in my country what is going on here. Most people have a vague notion of, there's something going on with world leaders at a summit somewhere in Switzerland, but most people have never seen the promenade here. They've never seen the watchtowers. They haven't got a clue of what actually is going on here. So I'm here as a reporter, if you like, to show the people what's going on and to tell them more about the World Economic Forum and the meaning of the plans that are being shaped here. Because I think that's very dangerous, and it's very important that people have more information about what's really going on.
Now, obviously, you're not an invited guest of the World Economic Forum. You don't have a seat at the table there. Your Prime Minister, Mr. Rutte, was invited here. What is your view on the discussions that take place in there on behalf of the people of the Netherlands?
Well, obviously, most people here agree on the main direction the world should be heading in. And I think that's the wrong direction. But most of them agree that we need climate change measures. We need a personal carbon dioxide budget. We need more migration, less national sovereignty. We need a CBDC to control over our currency through digital means, and so on and so forth. And Rutte obviously fits in perfectly well with that stream of thought. It's my conviction that during the COVID situation, these globalist plans really came to the surface of general politics in our several nation states, and now they're going to try to push that through even faster and even harder, and that's why I'm here. And I'm not really disappointed not being invited, because all the things that happen on the main stage, that's live streamed. We can watch that from our homes. But what's happening here in the streets, in the cafes, that's where all the networking is happening. That's where they make friends. That's where the public-private partnerships take place. So that means that big government and big business are essentially in a merger now, and that's why they're all aligned, because the big companies make the money, the big governments provide all the immunity and the financial securities, and then both of them take control over humanity, and that's what's happening today.
Last year, we saw Dutch farmers rise up against their government in a way that was very inspirational to people. I know in Canada we had the trucker protest last year. Where are the Dutch citizens on this? Do you think they finally had enough, and do you think that they will actually push for an exit from the European Union once and for all?
My feeling is that there is a very general discontent among the Dutch population, as well as the population in several of our other Western countries, but people are very hesitant to draw the obvious conclusions, being we need to stop being in the World Economic Forum, we need to stop being in the EU, we need to stop being in the World Health Organization, and so on. And so I think we're in the middle of a process where people are sort of getting what the consequences are. If you don't want to go along this path, okay, then you have to choose the other path, the alternative. And our party is that alternative for the Netherlands, and I really hope we'll have several alternatives in other European and Western countries as well, in political terms.
So one of the interesting things that I take away from that, and I'd love to do a little bit more research into him and perhaps have him on the show in a bit more of a longer form later on, is that Monsieur Baudet was saying that he would actually like to be in the room. He would like to be there as part of these discussions, and he doesn't have that opportunity as a member of the opposition. It is typically just governments that are invited by the World Economic Forum. But I find this a bit interesting in the Canadian context, because right now we have people like Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, saying that they want their ministers and caucus members to boycott it. They want them to have nothing to do with it. And I think there's it's an understandable impulse to that. But I also understand the opposing point of that, which is that you want to have your people there so that there is some pushback, so that you are actually calling out some of the nonsense that comes out. And I mean, whether it means anything or not, I have no idea. And I do want you to let me know in the comments here. Just take hypothetically a Danielle Smith figure. Would you like to have a Danielle Smith there in Davos pushing back against it? Or would you rather they say, we want nothing to do with this, we're staying back? Because there have been some people I've met that have not gone along with the prevailing narrative there. One of them is a man whose name you will know. Now, the name you know is not this guy, but it's this guy's father, Ross Perot Jr., who was very frank and very candid and basically pointed to the group in the Congress Center in Davos and said they have no idea what they're doing when it comes to inflation.
What should politicians do to rein in inflation?
Cut spending. It's that simple.
Why don't they want to do that?
They're spending way too much money, and it's causing inflation. Look, politicians love to give away money. Until the voters say no, it'll continue.
Why aren't voters saying no to that? Why do voters like government?
It's because I ask our U.S. leaders, I say, why do we have these deficits? So they go, Ross, none of the voters bring it up to us. So the voters have got to get focused. I think we've gone through this era of zero interest rate. So we've had the cheapest money in human history. So we've never lived through this phase. And I think when money was so cheap, we got very careless, very sloppy. It's caused inflation. Will continue to cause inflation until we pull it back.
Do the people here get that?
Oh, not really. No, because there are a lot of politicians here. So they don't quite get it. And not many politicians want to really prescribe tough medicine. And the world's going to go through some hard times as we get back in shape.
I'm just looking. We have a little messaging group. If you use Slack, you'll know what I'm talking about here with our team. And one of my colleagues is now debating who's cooler between Ross Perot Jr. and Thierry Baudet. He thinks, I think Ross has the edge because of Ross was wearing the aviator sunglasses. So Ross Perot Jr. was very cool, very frank, and saying, yeah, they don't get it. They're just going to keep spending money. They're going to keep printing money. And I think actually Ross Perot and Pierre Poilievre may hit it off with that form of messaging. But the reason I bring this up is because we get some crazy ideas that come out or things that I think deserve to be challenged and often aren't. I was watching some of the panel discussions today. Like I was saying earlier, there's so much going on. You can't be everywhere. You have to decide whether you want to be on the streets, whether you want to be in the rooms. And even in the rooms, there are multiple discussions going on at the same time. So you actually cannot be, you need like one of those Men in Black shape-shifting. Do they do the time thing? Can they time travel, Men in Black? I don't know. Maybe I'm mixing up my shows. But you need the ability to just freeze time and keep going back and redoing different things because this is the only way you can figure out the totality of what's happening. But there was one panel that I came across that was well into the evening here, actually, in which there was an oil and gas CEO, and they were talking about the just transition. Now, this is something you're hearing a lot more of now in Davos and in Canada because the Canadian government has been all over the just transition, which basically means they want to transition away from oil and gas, but they don't want to do it in a just way. They want to retrain people, let all those oil workers find jobs in tech, teach them how to code and whatnot. And in Davos, there are countless panels dealing with it directly and indirectly. And one of them was taking place this evening, and it had the CEO of Cepsa, I believe it's called, which is a Spanish oil and gas company. And I thought, oh, that's great. You know, there's an oil CEO on the panel, which means there'll be at least a little bit of pushback, a little bit of recognition that the industry itself has a role to play, and maybe we shouldn't just completely crap on them. Well, this is what Mr. Oil and Gas CEO said on the transition panel.
And on that last one, I think I will combine it with your question, what would be your wish, is to get much higher carbon prices and to use that money to subsidize clean energies. It's very, very simple. But in Europe, we've seen an enormous response this year, 20% less natural gas usage. Why? It was very expensive. Right. It's very simple. It's a very capitalist intervention, but just make what you try to avoid expensive and subsidize the thing that you try to build. It's not difficult, but we're not doing it, certainly not globally.
Right. Thank you.
So that was Martin Wetsaler, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name, but I actually don't particularly care because I think he's just a contemptible human being for saying that. And I was a bit perplexed. I'm like, wait a minute. Why is the oil and gas CEO saying so frankly that we need a bigger global carbon tax? We need to take people's money to subsidize more green energy. And acknowledging that this is very punitive in nature. When he looks at Europe, which right now has extraordinary heating costs that are preventing people from being able to actually heat their homes, and he says, well, natural gas usage in Europe went down 20%. Why? Because it was expensive. And his answer is, let's make things more expensive deliberately so people can't afford them, and then we use that money to finance green energy. And this strikes me as very odd. So I did a little bit of digging and find out that, of course, this company has been on the forefront of developing what they call green hydrogen technology to replace oil and gas. So the company has seen the writing on the wall. And they realize that government is going to be phasing out oil and gas anyway, so they just want to cash in on those sweet, sweet, sweet subsidies. So he's saying, as an oil and gas guy, yeah, I'm going to be progressive, bring it on, bring on the carbon tax, and then use it to subsidize all these other things. Oh, by the way, did you know we happen to be developing these other things here, yeah? So if people use oil and gas, he gets paid, and if people don't use oil and gas, he gets paid. What a fantastic grift. This is the kind of thing you can only come up with at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And this is what I mean about whether there might be value in someone that has a genuinely different perspective having a seat at the table. Because sometimes people are very open about their dislike of debate. One particularly noteworthy panel discussion that took place was about the pandemic. Now, I will be explaining this a little bit more in a video we are going to put out tomorrow. But COVID is pretty well over here. There are little vestiges of it, little hazes of COVID stuff, but for the most part, the pandemic's over. No one's wearing masks. Everyone's shaking hands. It doesn't really matter. But they had one discussion about COVID, and the CEO of Moderna, Stéphane Bancel, was on that panel, and he actually took aim at open debate, believe it or not.
The extent of this misinformation when it comes to vaccination, I think has, as somebody who works in the media, I mean, that was just overwhelming to see all of that across all the channels, right?
Yes, and I exactly agree with panelists, which is, I think, in some countries, you saw scientific debate in national TV at prime time. So you can imagine how people were scared. Ben has said, a lot of political debate in some countries, and the US was kind of maybe one of the worst places in the world. And you saw the differences of countries where all the parties would say, this has been approved by the regulators, clinical studies have been done, you should get your vaccines and so on. And then, as Seth said, the social media was just terrible. And so at the time of uncertainty where people were scared for their loved ones, many people, lockdowns. It was very hard for everybody from a just mental health standpoint. When you couple this with all that environment, you could see some countries where you had scientific debate and political debate and social media. If you had those three things, the vaccine rate very, very low.
Absolutely.
So the CEO of Moderna's position is that when there was scientific debate, political debate, and policy debate in media and politics on social media, vaccination rates were lower. And he says that's a bad thing. Now, obviously, if you are the CEO of Moderna, you make money when more people get vaccinated. So I get why, from a corporate perspective, less vaccination is a bad thing. But less debate is not a bad thing. And this is an opinion that should not go unchecked. This is an opinion that I find abhorrent. And why are you not winning the debate then? That would be my question to him. And if I see him tomorrow or Friday, that's the question I'm going to ask. Well, why were you not able to sell your product, for lack of a better term, in that debate? Why could you not rise to the challenge? Why are you so afraid of debate? And this is something, if you want to see a very cringeworthy but still noteworthy video from Davos, Ezra Levant and Avi Yamini of Rebel News, they were attempting to question the CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla. And as it so happened, I was in the middle of my interview with Thierry Baudet when Albert Bourla walked by, and I just saw Ezra and Avi and their crew just bolt, and I'm like, who is that? And then I learned a little bit later on. But he didn't want to answer any question. He gave them the John Kerry, he gave them the Chrystia Freeland. Tony Blair, another one who, by the way, today was completely uninterested in even so much as making eye contact. But the reason I bring this up is because when you have people that openly say they do not want public debate, this is a pharmaceutical company selling a product that was very hastily assembled, no matter how you stand or how you land on the vaccine. why are we accepting that debate and discussion in society, in the political realm, on social media are inherently bad things? And this does rub me the wrong way. And again, I have to question why no one is paying attention to this. Where are the media here? I mean, there are a number of people from all around the world that have their orange badges that are here as press from mostly European countries. And again, I don't know the makeup of the media room. I don't know some of these players in Europe, but certainly no Canadian media here that I've seen. No one asking Chrystia Freeland the questions, no one asking the Moderna CEO the questions, no one asking the oil and gas executives who somehow love carbon pricing for answers to their seemingly irreconcilable positions. And that is why it is so important to be here. Now, I came to Davos for the first time in May. I never in a million years thought I would go to Davos, let alone twice. I'm still not an invited white-badged elite. But I think there is tremendous value. And when I mentioned on the show yesterday, and I'll repeat it now, that it was a very illuminating experience sitting in the main conference hall when the Prime Minister of Spain, a head of government, was speaking, and it's basically an empty room. There were a couple of European leaders there. There were some staffers, security guys, a few journalists, but he's speaking to an empty room. And watching the feed, you'd never know that. You'd think that, wow, this is, basically he's addressing the who's who of the world. And in the end, no one shows up for a prime minister. I've had bigger audiences than the Prime Minister of Spain does, which again, a sentence that I never thought I would say. And there are certain things you only get when you're on the ground. And on that, I guess I agree with Klaus Schwab that you need to have things in person because the internet is a very poor substitute. So I'm going to put in a little bit of a plug here, if I may, for contributing to True North's coverage of Davos. Our donation portal is up at donate.tnc.news, donate.tnc.news. We have tried to keep costs down as best as we can, but it is an expensive place and it's a deliberately remote place. They actually try to make it so that it's hard to get to. And that is, I think, all the more important, what makes it all the more important for us to be here. So if you can chip in, please do. And if you can't, you can contribute by sharing our content and making sure we're pushing back against the echo chamber that tends to dominate here. So we'll have more footage in the days to come. And I might actually do, once I'm back in Canada, a bit of a recap show with some of the footage we didn't get to in the program. But if you follow me and, True North as well on Twitter and Facebook, you'll get access to footage that doesn't make it into the show, or you'll see it before it makes it into the show. And we thank you so much for covering all of that and encouraging us. That does it for me. Next program, I will be back in Canada, but I do thank you for tuning into these special live editions from Davos of the Andrew Lawton Show. From Switzerland, thank you, God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to the Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.